We got an interview here coming up with a colonel. I think it's a colonel, it may be a general. Anyways, he's explaining, I've listened to part of it, not all of it. He's explaining what went on pertaining to the planned attack that happened shortly. I'm assuming, like I said, I haven't listened to all this yet. I'm assuming the attack that happened after the 13 American soldiers was killed, along with about 100, maybe 150 other people that wound up perishing during that massive explosion. I'm really surprised that they're allowing for this individual to get on the media and explain things in detail the way that he's doing right here, because most of the time stuff like this is considered classified. I understand, and I think everybody else does, that sometimes friendly fire happens, and sometimes the unintentional circumstances does in fact occur during the period, especially of war. Unintended consequences. In other words, they didn't really intend to harm or hurt any innocent people, but if I'm understanding this properly, the tensions at that time was extremely high towards trying to get this amount of people on the planes and getting them out of Afghanistan. So if I'm wrong about my assessment in what I've heard, I've only heard maybe 3 to 5 minutes of this guy's interview. If I'm wrong about my assessment towards what I'm saying, I apologize. But I don't think that I am. But the point that I'm wanting to make is this: as you listen to this, war has never been a glamorous, glorious thing. We as a civilized society have always engaged in diplomacy first towards trying to work out some sort of prenuptial agreement between the two parties before we actually go to throwing missiles and bombs at each other. This diplomacy can help to spare thousands, if not millions, of lives if it is done on the proper form. If what he's talking about proves to be so, I believe that the fault falls upon to the Taliban, because the Taliban did not secure that area to the point that there was a major explosion that occurred that costed 13 American lives. And it was the Taliban that obviously did not go in there to fulfill their duties of making sure that it was a secure area, knowing the agreement that had been made prior to the administration that's in power now towards not harming or hurting any soldiers and allowing for us to leave at our own free will. So as you listen to this, maybe you can make more heads or tails out of it than I do, but from my assessment towards what I have heard so far, and I've heard this guy speak before, he's on up the ladder pertaining to the Pentagon, pertaining to the CIA. So if you would please listen to this, those who desire to listen to this, and make your own assessment towards what you think that he's talking about here. Thank you.
Our missile was fused to detonate inside the vehicle to further minimize the chance for civilian casualties. It struck the vehicle at 4:53 p.m., which produced an explosive event and follow-on flames significantly larger than a Hellfire missile would have been expected to produce. It is my assessment that leaders on the ground and the strike cell had achieved a reasonable certainty at the time of the strike to designate the vehicle as an imminent threat to U.S. forces at the airport. in that they made this self-defense strike in accordance with established rules of engagement. That assessment is based upon interviews with leaders on the ground and members of the strike cell, on a review of the intelligence available to the team at the time of the strike, and on the team's interpretation of how this vehicle and its occupants' actions were confirming the intelligence that they were seeing. It is further my assessment that the strike team were convinced at the time of the strike that the area was clear of civilians and that they had taken prudent steps in regards to weaponeering the strike to minimize the potential for civilian casualties. Finally, it is my assessment that they did believe, as reported, that there was a secondary explosion. Our investigation now concludes that the strike was a tragic mistake. First, I will stress this was not a rushed strike. The strike cell deliberately followed and observed this vehicle and its occupants for 8 hours, while cross-checking what they were seeing with all available intelligence to develop a reasonable certainty of the imminent threat that this vehicle posed to our forces. Second, while the initial reports indicated a secondary explosion, the initial investigation could only conclude that there was a possible to probable presence of external accelerants that could include either explosive material in the vehicle or an ignition of the gas tank of the vehicle. Subsequent analysis could not rule out the presence of a small amount of explosive material, but determined that the most likely cause was the ignition of gas from a propane tank located immediately behind the car. Such an ignition would have created a brief but massive fireball oriented directly up and out of the compound that was observed in the video and displayed in this photo. If we could get that next photo up, please.
They have me disabled, sir.
Finally, while the strike cell reported, John, can you hear me okay?
I got you, sir.
Roger. Finally, while the strike cell reported the presence of 2 adult males, one inside the vehicle and one outside the vehicle at the time of the strike, the cell initiated a review of their footage immediately following the report of civilian casualties and determined that a few partially obscured forms were briefly visible moving in the compound. This led to my initiation of an investigation within 24 hours of the strike. A comprehensive review of all the available footage and reporting on the matter led us to a final conclusion that as many as 10 civilians were killed in the strike, including up to 7 children. At the time of the strike, based upon all the intelligence and what was being reported, I was confident that the strike had averted an imminent threat to our forces at the airport. Based upon that assessment, I and other leaders in the department repeatedly asserted the validity of this strike. I am here today to set the record straight and acknowledge our mistakes. I will end my remarks with the same note of sincere and profound condolences to the family and friends of those who died in this tragic strike. We are exploring the possibility of ex gratia payments. And I'll finish by saying that while the team conducted the strike, did so in the honest belief that they were preventing an imminent attack on our forces and civilian evacuees, we now understand that to be incorrect. With that, I'm ready to take your questions.
Thank you, General. Tom.
General, this is a complete and utter failure. Can you explain how this possibly could have happened?
Well, so this particular strike, it certainly was a terrible mistake, and we certainly regret that. And I've been very clear that we take full responsibility for it. At the same time, we were carrying on a number of complex operations designed to defend ourselves. We conducted a strike a couple of days before up in Nangarhar that was very successful. We conducted other operations across the battle space to defend ourselves during this very difficult 48-hour period when so many imminent threats were manifest. So while I agree with it, this strike certainly did not come up to our standards, and I profoundly regret it. I would not qualify the entire operation in those terms.
And will anybody be held responsible?
We are in the process right now of continuing that line of investigation, and I have nothing for you now because that involves personnel issues.
Please identify yourself and your outlet when you ask your question, David.
David Martin, CBS News. So you said that you started following this car after it showed up at a place associated with ISIS. In retrospect, was that place associated with ISIS? And this was described as an over-the-horizon strike, which is what the U.S. is going to be relying on from now on in Afghanistan. So what does this incident say about the reliability of future strikes against terrorist threats in Afghanistan?
Sure, David. So I'll take the first part of your question and begin with that. So point one on the map, we do assess very definitely associated with ISIS-K. In fact, a little less than 24 hours later, rockets will be launched from that point against the airfield. So we had very good intelligence to make us think point one on the map was in fact an area where ISIS was centered. So I think that was a very good intelligence supported that belief. Now, the second part of your question about whether this will affect future OTH operations. Let me be clear. This was a self-defense strike taken under self-defense rules of engagement based on an imminent threat to attack us. That is not the way that we would strike in an OTH mission going into Afghanistan against ISIS-K targets. For one thing, that will not be a self-defense strike. It'll be done under different rules of engagement. So, and we would have a lot more opportunity probably than we had under this extreme time pressure to take a look at the target, to use a phrase that you'll be familiar with, to soak the target with multiple platforms, to have an opportunity to develop extended pattern of life. None of these things were available to us given the urgent and pressing nature of the imminent threat to our forces.
Phil?
Are you considering reparations for the victims here? And what happened with this strike say to you about the over-horizon capability that we've been hearing so much about? What are the risks involved with carrying out strikes when you don't have people on the ground in Afghanistan going forward?
Sure. So as I said in my statement, we are considering ex gratia or reparations for this, and that'll ultimately be a matter for policy. So we're in consultation with the Office of the Secretary of Defense to determine the way forward there. As you will also understand, it's very difficult to reach out on the ground in Afghanistan, to actually reach people. But we are very interested in doing that, and we'll move on it based on our ability to do that. So your question about this and OTH, I'll sort of echo what I said to David. I would reject a parallel between this operation and an over-the-horizon strike against an ISIS-K target. Again, because we will have an opportunity to further develop the target in time, to look at pattern of life. That time was not available to us because this was imminent threat to our forces. It's important that I emphasize that. We did not have the luxury of time to develop pattern of life and to do a number of other things. We struck under the theory of reasonable certainty. Probably our strikes in Afghanistan going forward will be under a higher standard. That's a policy matter, not a purely military matter. But I don't think you should draw any conclusions about our ability to strike in Afghanistan against ISIS-K targets in the future based on this particular strike.
Sylvie?
Hello, General Sylvie Lawton from AFP. You said that you had intelligence about a threat emanating from a white Toyota. So was it this intelligence was not good, or there was another white Toyota which was dangerous and nothing happened from another white Toyota?
So I would tell you this. Clearly, our intelligence was wrong on this particular white Toyota Corolla. At the same time, we undertook a variety of things to make it hard for them to get at us during this period of time. We closed the gates, which we didn't want to do at HKI during this period of time as force protection. We were very active with our ISR overhead, which we know is very, often has a suppressive effect on their activities. We still took rockets the next day, as you know, and they fired those rockets from near Point One and from other places actually near the route of this vehicle. But I would tell you unequivocally in this case, clearly the intelligence was wrong on this vehicle. And we certainly regret that, as I've been very clear.
Let me go to the phones. Jennifer Steinhauer, New York Times. Jennifer, you there?
My question's on a different matter, John, for after this.
All right. Okay. Louis Martinez, ABC. You there, Louis? Okay, nothing heard. Nancy Youssef.
Thank you. General, can you clarify a couple points for me? If I'm understanding you correctly, you followed the wrong sort of flow from the beginning in. That is, you weren't following one vehicle and mistaken it for another one. And also in your initial statement, you said that there was no initial reports of civilian casualties. It appears that there was at least some concern about civilian casualties very early on. So on what basis did you make that statement? And finally, was any of the intelligence that you were using gathered from the Taliban? Thank you.
So let me begin with the last question. Nothing we did was gathered from the Taliban, and I should be very clear about that. We selected this car based on its movement at a targeted area of interest to us, a known targeted area of interest to us, and we held it throughout the day. Clearly, based on the end result, that was a mistake, and I have acknowledged that.
Okay, Megan.
Megan Myers from Military Times. During this time, were you tracking any other suspicious activity in Kabul that might have also been part of this threat? And do you have any intelligence from after this drone strike that suggests what happened to the imminent threat afterward?
Sure. So as I noted in my comments, we had over 60 very, very high caliber reports of imminent threat to our forces in and around Kabul. Typically, those are signals based, but there are also some human and other human intelligence as well. So we have a variety of sources for that intelligence. We believe that the strike we took a couple of days prior up in Nangarhar actually had an effect on quietening down because we got a key attack planner in that strike. We believe that disrupted some of their plans. Additionally, we did things to make it harder for them to get to us. For example, we closed the gates. The gates, as we know, are a particular point where we're vulnerable. So we decided not to process people, and we hunkered down for a little bit of time while this threat was still there. So there were over 60 clear threat vectors that we were dealing with during this period of time, including, as I've noted before, the rocket attacks that occurred, a little bit after this from locations that are displayed on the graphic that you have. Thank you.
A really quick follow-up. Not in terms of the number of threats, but the number of other cars or groups of people that you were following that day. Were you tracking anybody else this closely?
We tracked a lot of other people. We didn't track anybody as closely as we did this because of the limitations on our resources. And frankly, we thought this was a good lead. We were wrong.
Alex.
Thanks, John. General McKenzie, this is Alex Marquardt from CNN. You mentioned that immediately following the attack, you saw shapes in the video that led you to believe that this necessitated an investigation, that there could have been more civilians there. On September 1st, we heard from General Milley, who called this a righteous strike. This was several days later. Did you, at the time, several days later, also believe that this was a righteous strike? And could you talk about your erosion of confidence over the next subsequent 2 weeks of the investigation?
Sure. So I think we issued a statement from U.S. Central Command about 6 hours after the strike, acknowledging the possibility of civilian casualties. So we knew from the very beginning there was a possibility of civilian casualties. I think we still thought we had good reason to have taken that strike, and it took us gathering the facts to change that. We didn't think, as you will understand and appreciate, we didn't take the strike because we thought we were wrong. We took the strike because we thought we had a good target. It takes a little while to uncover some of those things. We moved and worked as rapidly as we could, and actually I think we worked extremely rapidly to get this information out and to make it public.
Fine.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, General. So despite numerous intelligence reports and warnings, on the 26th, we had that tragic attack on the airport. 13 U.S. service members were killed, in addition to tens of Afghan civilians. Again, on the 29th, in this strike, another tragedy took place. As you said, 10 civilians were killed, among them 7 children. Is that a failure of intelligence or leadership in Afghanistan? And what do you intend to do about that? Thank you.
Well, I will tell you, so we had 2 events. We had the attack at Abbey Gate, we had this, and we had this strike. The Abbey Gate attack, you're in combat with an enemy who is alive and has his own will. And sometimes that enemy his plans are just gonna work. You can't cover every eventuality all the time, despite our very best efforts to do that. And we took every precaution we could at Abbey Gate. In fact, when we had threats develop over the 48 hours that followed, as I've noted, we closed the gates in order to, recognizing it would reduce our ability to bring people in, but at the same time, we thought that was the best thing we could do to actually reduce our attack surface, if you will, to protect our forces. There are also a number of attacks that were thwarted. These are 2 that you know about because they're high visibility and we're talking about them. Others were thwarted and did not occur. So the silence of those attacks should mean something too. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to prove the negative.
Tony?
Hi, sir. Tony Capascio with Bloomberg. Got two quick questions. Are you going to release the report of investigation? Two, in your fact gathering, to what extent did you rely on the New York Times' extensive video investigation and then the talks with NGOs or civilian eyewitnesses at the scene?
So repeat the first question again for me.
You'll be releasing the final report of investigation.
The final report, the report is a highly classified document. There will be procedures that would have to be followed to declassify elements of that document if it were to be released. And I'll just leave that question there. As we in fact worked our investigation, we used all available sources of information to inform us as we went forward. Certainly that included some of the stuff the New York Times did. It also included our own extensive resources in this area, which we looked at. So we tried to go everywhere we could and not overlook anything as we tried to build a picture.
Taliban at all aid in the investigation or the fact gathering?
No.
Thanks.
Lucas?
General Mackenzie, Lucas Tomlinson, Fox News. Did you have forces on the ground that helped you conduct this strike?
No, we did not. As you know, no time were our forces really away from Hamid Karzai International Airfield. So there was nobody there on the ground to have to play that role. I think you can see from the graphic that the position of the strike was about 3 to 4 kilometers to the west of H-Kaya. So no, there was nobody, either us or a proxy of ours, that was involved in this.
That includes Special Operations Forces?
Explicitly.
Can you talk about the challenges of conducting these drone strikes without any U.S. troops on the ground?
So we conducted a very successful drone strike 2 days earlier up in Nangarhar province. And we got the target, and I think that had a significant event on dislocating and suppressing ISIS-K's ability to attack us during this period of time. So we actually had success with that. This one we did not have success with, and we've been very clear about owning up to our responsibility in this regard.
Lucas, you've had 3 questions. We've got time for just a couple more. Tara Kopp.
Thank you. General Mackenzie, Tara Kopp with Defense One. Since there are no more U.S. forces on the ground, how would the ex gratia payments be provided to surviving family members if they are provided? And then I know you walked us through the timeline at the beginning of this, but can you give us the overall amount of time spent actually identifying and confirming this target before the strike was taken?
Sure. So as for the ex gratia payments, we're working that right now, and it will be difficult, as I noted in my remarks, I think, or in one of the first questions, it will be difficult to do that without a presence on the ground. And that's just something we're going to have to work through. I don't have a better answer for you right now, other than we recognize the obligation, and we'll continue to work that problem. So in a situation like this, to go to the second part of your question, as you continue to look at the target over the course of the day, you begin to build probabilities, and you begin to weigh, are we going to take a strike? Why are we going to take the strike? When the vehicle came up to the final point at point 7 on your map, which is actually, as I've noted, the closest to the airfield it had been all day, we are very concerned about a white Corolla being involved in an attack. So the cumulative force of all those, the intelligence that we gathered throughout the day, the position of the vehicle, its nearness to the airport, the imminence of the threat, and the other SIGINT that we're getting throughout the day all led us to the moment of deciding to take the strike.
And one last follow-up, who actually ordered the strike? Who had the final authority to say fire?
So in this case, the target engagement authority is held by the over-the-horizon commander who's forward in the theater. The over-the-horizon strike cell commander, I should say.
Okay, we got time for one more, and then we're going to have to let the general go. Jeff Selden, VOA.
Jeff Selden from VOA. Thanks very much for doing this. General, given how this over-the-horizon strike went, where do things stand in terms of getting at least a closer presence, a closer basing agreement for future over-the-horizon strikes? And we've been told that the Taliban have made various commitments to counterterrorism. I know you said that they didn't provide any information for this strike, but did they provide any sort of help in the closing days in terms of preventing the threat against from ISIS-K, or have they been helpful since then in cracking down on ISIS-K as they continue to plot against U.S. Western targets?
So I think the best I can answer your question is to sort of take the middle part of the question. In the final days, and really in the second half of our time at HKI, as we continued our evacuation, the Taliban were helpful in establishing an outer security perimeter, which actually, we believe, prevented some attacks from developing. Now look, there's a downside to that too. It also allowed them to screen people that might otherwise have gotten to the airfield. And that's just a hard, harsh fact. And you have to balance those two. Force protection of our forces, which is supported by Taliban external presence, against the fact that it may prevent some people that you would like to bring out from being able to get to you unmolested. And that's a difficult balance. I frankly came down that I wanted to protect our forces, and I needed that outer boundary. And to that degree, we were able to work together. I have no particular affection for the Taliban, and I don't know that they're doing anything at all for us right now. But those questions would probably better go to the Department of State, along with questions about basing and where we might be able to get closer basing than where we are right now. I know all of those things are actively being worked by our diplomats as we speak.
Thank you, General. Appreciate your time this afternoon. I'll turn it over to you for any last closing comments you might want to make, sir.
No, John, I appreciate the opportunity to come on. I appreciate the opportunity to take responsibility for this, because I do feel responsible for it. And I appreciate the questions from the media. Thanks, John.
Now that's the difference between an American government and a authentic government. The Saudi Arabian government is fighting tooth and nail right now towards still being in total denial that they had anything to do with financing and masterminding 9/11. There is so many victims out of New York that are crying for some sort of justice to be done, even if it's done on a monetary level, just like the United States military. They're owning up to making a mistake. So they're going to pay some sort of settlement to the loved ones or to the cousins, those that are closest to this bad occurrence affecting people, trying to make it up in some sort of way and giving out this type of confirmation. Once more, the Saudi Arabian government has yet to confess or admit to any involvement pertaining to 9/11 that I'm aware of. But in ending of my statements, just on a low impact zone pertaining to what went on with this general and his team, obviously there was a mistake made, which anybody with an inquisitive mind has to ask themselves the simple question, okay, if this mistake was made, how many more other mistakes was made? Well, we know that it was a mistake by walking away the way that we did in leaving so many Americans over there to begin with. We know it was a mistake by leaving so much equipment, guns, ammunition. I mean, there's no doubt it cost thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars to move all that equipment back over from Afghanistan to the United States. But why wasn't it completely destroyed? How come it was just basically mangled or injured material that can be patched up and reworked again? How come the material? How come the United States military force, their assets was not completely destroyed or buried or something? Or maybe booby traps on all of them. I don't know. But the bottom line is this: we have engaged into a 20-year war that we have lost. I don't forgot now how many lives it was. It was way up there in the count. in addition to all the Afghanistans and all the people that was supporting our military, in a 20-year spree, or sprawl, whichever word you want to use, over $2 trillion has been spent, and this is the final end results of it. You know, it actually turned into, I guess, partially the forgotten war, almost like the Korean War there towards the last, because there really wasn't a whole lot of chit-chat and talk with the media pertaining to this war going on over in Afghanistan until the final developments or the final layout started heating up and started intensifying. There's no doubt, if we made a mistake, the American government needs to try to turn a wrong into a right in some sort or another. But at the same token, the Saudi Arabia government, that I believed masterminded, and others do too as well, 9/11, as well as financed the terrorists that had come over here during 9/11, they need to ante up pertaining to the victims in trying to once more turn a wrong into a right. If they don't do that, that speaks volumes about their illegitimate government, even over in the Saudi Arabian government, that should be classified, as far as I'm concerned, towards being the same thing as the government of the Taliban, which, as far as I'm concerned, is not a government. It's a bunch of yahoos. It would be like New York City start honoring, let's say, Gang 13 or some of those other big gangs in New York City. It would be like the police force all of a sudden giving them the same authority as the police force, even though they know that they're illegitimate people that does illegitimate things. Why would any nation, a decent, civilized society, want to look at either Afghanistan or any of those countries over there that wants to play by a completely different set of rules? And right now, I'm primarily talking to the Saudi Arabians over there that basically had money to blow, but we know for a fact that they sponsored all types of terrorist known organizations, in addition to the ones that we didn't know nothing about, that if they have done this, why are we still looking at them as being a legitimate government? Especially if the information was there from the get-go, and I believe that it was, on the very day of 9/11, if someone would have just dug a little deeper, and if we didn't have dirty, corrupt politicians working in the White House that wanted to cover it up for the Saudis, that if these things would have been discovered on the front end, and instead of us going to war with the Taliban simply because bin Laden led us down this rabbit hole of knowing that, yeah, bin Laden was part of the terrorist attacks of 9/11, and yeah, there's bad people in Afghanistan that does, it's a terrorist known organization country that harbor these type of people. But if we would have known up front that it was in fact the Saudi Arabia government, there may have been some major choices made differently, and instead of us going to war with Afghanistan, we would have actually went to war with the primary people that we should have went to war to begin with, which was in fact the Saudi Arabians. This holy war between the Christian society and the Islamic radical terrorist towards the bad wanting to overpower the good is not really nothing new under the sun. This has been going on now since the beginning of time, either through individuals or through groups or through countries. This should not amaze or be something so great alarming that these occurrences have happened to us, because they have happened in the past, and who knows how deep that the Saudi Arabian tentacles actually go in other major events that's happened to our own people that they helped to sponsor by killing the American soldiers over there. Who knows? But getting to the basis of it, getting to the initial core of it, you always got to go to the core of origin. Start at the beginning. If you can't figure out where you are in the center or down towards the end of the finish line, go back to the beginning. Look, analyze something, decipher, debate, talk about it. In the beginning, after Rome fell, there was another movement that started that was the opposite under Abraham, the Abraham Spring, not the spring, but the Abraham resolution that come from the teachings of Abraham through the teachings of the Muslims. There was another movement that was distorted, that tried to give itself the image of being good, but in reality, we know the track record of how that the Sharia law has tried to dominate and dictate not only us over here, pertaining to us being a Christian nation, but tried to dominate and dictate over in Jerusalem towards destroying the Holy Land. We know these things for a fact. And it's not the first time that these things has occurred. This movement is a movement towards trying to dominate all the world in bowing down or kissing the ring of one of the main perpetrators in Saudi Arabia and giving homage to their God, which, as far as I'm concerned, their God is a corrupt God. Their God is the devil, an evil God, in which there's no such thing as an evil God. There's evil spirits that they have subjecting themselves into. They're wanting us to become subjected to the same type of influences that they're subjected to. And us as a Christian society should have been able to have seen through this, and we darn sure never should have covered it up if we know for a fact that it was in fact the Saudi Arabians that masterminded and financed 9/11. There's a lot of people right now asking a lot of questions because of the 20th year anniversary that we've just went through as of last weekend. There's a lot of people asking a lot of questions. How come certain things did not occur during the time that we was attacked? Well, one of the main things is the fire of exchange. Whenever you're dealing with a group of people that got hit the way that we was hit, we was basically, the majority of us was subject to, I'm going to use the terminology of culture shock. We was shocked. We didn't know really what to think. We didn't know what was going on. But you got to keep in mind, our United States military, that's right there with the President of the United States, which was in fact the Bushes. You got to keep in mind that whenever Pearl Harbor was attacked, our people know to do certain things during that time of attack. And one of the first things that they done was shut down all the borders, started rounding up people that they felt like was part of the people that was wanting to do us harm. And we set back and got a clear footing towards where we was going with World War II before we ever got involved in it. You keep in mind, they wanted us to get involved in it. Oh, they was itching strongly for the Americans to get involved in World War II. And the Americans really shunned from it until we got attacked. After we got attacked, there was no turning back. We had to do something. We had to engage into trying to stop a madman, which at the time was Hitler, and trying to dominate society with his ideology. Well, we basically got the same thing now pertaining to the Saudis. It's the same get up, it's just in a different bowl. It's just masted up different. It's got a different appearance. But it's the same exact thing, and that's the reason why that they've come over here so strongly. I'm going to use Natchez sting like a butterfly, Muhammad Ali. I'm going to use him for an example pertaining to their organization or that movement that come over here towards wanting to draw sympathizers into their movement. Well, that's the exact same thing that Hitler done in the 20s. He was sending people over here that would sympathize in being a white supremacist, in thinking that they could dominate and dictate not just to the Jews, but also to the Gentiles. And they had a plan, a master plan, that they was going to dominate all the world with their evil ideology. Well, our ancestors stopped it. They stopped it, and they ended it real quick because they knew that nobody wanted to be a victim to their tyranny or their tyrant evil doings. I'm going to sum it up that way. I'm going to speak in layman terms. So our ancestors went over there and they defeated the enemy. We haven't never defeated the enemy. The enemy is still at large. The very enemy that formigated, financed, and masterminded 9/11 is still at large. Is still at large. And until you cut the head of the snake off, the poison venom is still going to be released into all them other countries over there that's just a cesspool of one wanting to dominate the other, pertaining to who's the king of the hill. And it's turned into nothing more than just a cluster, you know what. Once more, it wasn't predominantly handled on the front end of the core of origin, going back to 9/11, whenever our intel knew that we was fixing to be attacked the day before we got attacked, but they didn't have enough time to make it official in getting it out to the general public to prepare for the inedible. And if they know that we was going to be attacked the day before, I'm pretty sure they probably knew who it was in behind the attack. And now we're finding out that the two Saudi Arabians that was staying in California at the time, that I believe was on the flight that wound up there in Pennsylvania, that went down into the field. We're finding out that the Saudi Arabians had direct influences towards financing those two people over in California that did in fact come from Saudi Arabia. You got to keep in mind 15 out of the terrorists come from the country of Saudi Arabia. Why would we not think that it was the Saudi Arabians? That's the question I got to ask. Why would we not have thought to have put 2 plus 2 together and say, you know what, if this guy come from this area, this guy come from this area, this guy come from this area, well, there must be something to that area. But because we was all in a flutter, and because we was going through shock, because we'd never seen anything like that on that scale, and I hope to God that I never do, pertaining to the Americans being attacked, we wasn't thinking clearly. We wasn't asking the right questions. We wasn't taking our generals like we're taking this one right now and basically scrutinizing him and finding out the truth about certain things. See, this that's going on right now, it's a big deal. It's a big deal. Don't get me wrong. Anytime you take life, it's a big deal. But it's not near as big of a deal as what it was towards losing almost 3,000 people in a matter of a couple hours. That was a big deal. That should have been analyzed. It should have been scrutinized. It should have been looked at through a fine-tuned comb. It should have had magnifying glasses on it. There should have been all kinds of media covering, asking questions. But like I said, because we was going through a type of shock at our surprise, it sifted through the cracks and it didn't get appropriately taken care of. Once more, Saddam Hussein didn't have no mass destruction of bombs. If the truth be known, the reason why that Mr. Senior Bush went after Saddam Hussein was primarily because Saddam Hussein had already put out a threat against the Bush family. A direct threat. That if they come over there messing with them, that they're going to mess with us back. And of course, what did the 41st president do? Mr. Senior Bush, what did he do during that exchange? He went over there and messed with them people. He was blowing up their bridges and blowing up their towns and basically disrupting. And I'm not saying that it shouldn't have been done, because they're bad people. They're evil, demonic, cruel people. Their whole thinking is out of whack. I'm not saying that some of that shouldn't have been done. But you got to keep in mind, whenever Saddam Hussein was dealing with a rootless group of people, and Saddam Hussein was trying to get on the international stage towards being an adequate, responsible government, you got to keep in mind, whenever you're dealing with these type of people, you got to deal with them on their level. And some of the things that Saddam Hussein done, I don't agree with. Whenever it come to killing his own brothers and cousins and people that was sitting at the table that disagreed with him. He was a ruthless individual. Saddam Hussein was. And there towards the last, his own people hung him. I think it was his own people, may have been our people. I think it was our people that helped to hang him. Just like it was our people that killed bin Laden. But once more, let's keep our eye on the problem here towards the core of origin, more so than the secondary and the thirdary problems. There's no doubt. They're bad people. That whole region, that whole area in the Middle East has some of the most craziest ideals. But then again, as far as I'm concerned, you can look at India. India's not what you would consider a harmful country, but you can look at their ideology pertaining to their religion and the way that they worship. As far as I'm concerned, ain't right. It don't match up with the teachings of the King James Version. Not that I'm trying to push anything off on the people from India, but the fact of the matter is, they do have some very, very strange concepts about who they worship and who they pray to. Kind of like the people down here in Louisiana, in New Orleans, having voodoo, casting spells on people, sticking little needles in dolls, and hanging chicken legs and chicken feet from porches, trying to cast spells on people. But, you know, you got to look at what's actually happened here in America for the past 20 years, It's opened itself up pertaining to all this paranormal behavior. Now the Wiccan, since 1986, has become a organization recognized by the United States government towards them getting the same tax exemptions as the Baptists, the Presbyterians, the Methodists, the Church of Christ, the Church of God, the Assembly of God, the Pentecostal, and any other known organization over here. So, I mean, it has turned into a cluster of madness that now we're having to sift through after 20 years of dedication towards trying to get to the root of the problem. And instead of us getting to the root of the problem, all we done was make it that much more complicated, or I guess in some sort of ways. I guess in some ways we did leave a footprint towards people wanting to have their own independence over there, but obviously it wasn't strong enough for the people in Afghanistan to fight for their own liberty, to fight for their own freedoms, because they gave up, they surrendered within an 11-day period. They gave up the Capitol building. That'd be like people in the White House and people in the Capitol saying, okay, Gang 13, and all you wild Codys in Mexico, y'all just come on down here and just have at it and take over, and y'all can tell the people what you want to tell them and receive all the goods that you want to from the people, and we're just going to let you have it. We're going to bow down to you. We're going to be subservients to you. Do you think the American people's going to do that? No, they're not. Matter of fact, the American people won't even do that to people that present themselves as good patriots, that's wanting to do it forcefully the way that they're doing it rather than voting for it, because doing it forcefully is an illegal act. The same thing as the Taliban that went in and forced their way towards making them people surrender. It was an illegal act. We're not supposed to ever negotiate with thieves and thugs and terrorists. That's always been our number one policy. Now, there's been times that we've negotiated towards trying to save lives a little bit, towards bending the rules one way or the other. But by and large, we're not supposed to be a country that bows to another organization that we know is evil or cruel, that is uncivilized, that is wanting to bring this tyranny into our lives. What has happened to the backbone of America is what I want to know. There's no doubt what happened here was a horrible thing, of 7 children that got killed, and a total, I guess, of 29 that died. That's what I'm thinking. I don't know. It may not be that many. They're saying August the 29th. It may not have been that many. As many as 10 civilians, including 7 children, is what it says. So by our government willing to make some sort of an appeal towards trying to right a wrong, shows you the courtesy, shows you the gracefulness of what we're trying to do and what we're trying to establish on a civilized tone. You're not seeing that from Saudi Arabia. They're not coming out of the woodwork and saying, well, you know what, we're going to pay for all the victims up there in New York City, and we're going to try to make this up to those people by giving everybody, let's say, $150,000 apiece. That's the closest of the kin. Or maybe $250,000, maybe $500,000, I don't know. I may be way off with my numbers. But the thing about it is, they're not doing that. And because of it, it's becoming a struggle in the courts, and now the courts is bringing out, these witnesses are bringing out the facts pertaining to how the Saudi Arabians was engaged directly, not indirectly, but directly with 9/11. And that's the very thing that I've been trying to tell my peers and tell the people around here that has scarred me and degraded me and tried to put me on a pedestal of somebody that was whacked, somebody that was just totally out of focus. And now we're beginning to understand the very things that I was teaching and preaching and telling people about are the very things that now are proven to be so. Proven to be so. This demonic figure that it talks about in the Bible will be the last imitation of the true Antichrist that will come onto the scene, that will not actually be the Antichrist, just like Hitler, just like Napoleon, but they'll be, or it will be, or he will be, because it says in the Bible, there was given unto him a great sword. Well, this sword ain't just going to be given to him. There's going to be a battle for him to take that sword. Nobody's going to walk up and give the enemy anything in their right mind. Nobody. So the only way that he's going to be able to obtain the sword symbolizing peace pertaining to the apocalypse sword is to take that sword. Is to defend his honor by winning the decency of that sword. Now, in exchange, if he does win in the Doomsday Devil's Duel, then I guess the sword was given to him. Just as the Bible prophecy predicts, for there was given unto him a great sword. Once more, you got to study prophecy, not just in the book of Revelations, but also in the 2 latter part chapters of Daniel. You got to put the puzzle together. You got to put the dots together if you're going to figure out what's going to occur in end-time biblical Bible prophecy. Way, way before the false prophet and way before the true Antichrist. That's the part that I've been trying to teach various people that thought that they had all the answers to all the questions around in this area, that basically denounced me, basically treated me like I was a heretic, basically treated me like I was an outcast, to the point that I don't guess I could go to any of these churches directly right here in Weakley County or Obion County without somebody raising up and saying something about me being in their presence. In other words, I could walk in there with a muffle that you put on a dog to keep the dog from biting and keep the dog from barking, keep the dog quiet. If they put a muffle on my face, on my lips, around my mouth, to the point that I couldn't talk, there would be no humanly way that I could talk while this device or this, whatever you want to call it, was around my head. They would still be objectionable towards me walking into their presence. You know why? Because they've been bamboozled. They've been hoodooed. They've been deceived. And now, because they've been deceived, they've got egg on their face. And now, because they've got egg on their face, they're not legitimate enough to admit that they got egg on their face. Once more, it reflects back to that saying that I've tried to say before: a good man can make a mistake, but it takes a better one to admit it. In ending, did this human being just get through admitting to a mistake? Yes, he did. Yes, he did. And that separates the boys from the men, pertaining to being honest and upfront and taking responsibility for your actions. And I'm going to let the rest of it speak for itself, pertaining to what you've just heard, regardless whether you heard it from him or you heard it from the commentators that was asking the questions, or you heard it from me. I'm going to let you draw your own conclusion here towards a country that has been driven off into a $30 trillion deficit, that our bridges and our roads is falling apart, that the drug inducement has inundated our communities and inundated our schools, and yes, inundated our churches. Our lawyers have become corrupt. Our judges has become corrupt. Our politicians has become corrupt. Our preachers has become corrupt. And it's all based around the good old American dollar bill. Once more, a good person can make a mistake, but it takes a better one to admit it. The United States of America just got through admitting to as many as 10 civilians, including 7 children, that was killed illegitimately, and they're going to go out of their way towards trying to turn a wrong into a right. You're not going to find that in your barbaric, heathenistic, cruel, insensitive, Sharia law nations or countries over there in the Middle East. They're steadily burning the candle at both ends. They lie on top of lies. They're not to be trusted. The whole bunch is corrupt. They're still dealing with primitive laws and primitive measures. They're still wanting to get around on camels. The people are lazy. They don't want to fight for their own dignity. They don't want to stand up. I guess they've been treated like a bunch of robots. You know, it took the Russians a long time after the Berlin Wall fell before the country that merged from Russia, the Ukrainians, it took a while for that to happen. Whenever you have a group of people that's been taught all their lives to do this, to do that, to move to the right, to move to the left, this is what you wear, this is what you don't wear, this is what we expect out of you, basically being treated like a bunch of prisoners by their own countrymen under this tyranny rule Sharia laws. Whenever you have a group of people that's been subjected to this type of environment all their lives, that's the only thing that they know. The same thing happened to the black race over here in America pertaining to the slave trade. Whenever Abraham Lincoln finally told the black people that they no longer had to be the white man's slave, there was so many of them over here in America that actually did not know how to perform. They did not know how to think. They did not know what to do. They didn't know how to dress. They was just bewildered of themselves because all their lives that they had been told what to do. So don't think that it's strange that one particular culture responds and reacts the same way as another culture, because it's a pattern. It's a pattern. And we have tried to break the pattern over in the Middle East. The sad thing about it is we tried to do it on the wrong level. We tried to do it with the wrong group of people. If we would have went in and cut the head of the snake off to where the venom wasn't feeding the rest of the little snakes, eventually you'll teach the little snakes who the big snake is, just like the occurrence that happened with Moses, that Pharaoh thought that his 2 snakes could defeat Moses' 1 snake, and after it was all said and done with, it was Moses' 1 snake that defeated Pharaoh's 2 snakes. Because good has always exceeded over evil. Light is always stronger than darkness. Good luck to all of us. As I'm ending this particular show, I feel sorry for the civilians and the children that wound up being harmed or killed during that attack. But I still blame a lot of that on the Taliban, because they were supposed to have created a strong, secure, safe environment according to the agreement while the Americans exited their country. Thanks again, and shalom.